Welcome to the Growth Boss podcast, where we seek out the secrets to high-performing campaigns from some of the smartest marketers in the world. I'm your host, Jared Smith. Today, I have Annie Maguire with me, and she's going to teach us how to build a website that converts in just 4 weeks. Annie Maguire is a freelance writer who helps small and mid-sized businesses build websites that bring in more leads and customers. She specializes in writing clear and persuasive website copy that guides visitors to take action. Annie also does customer research to understand what potential buyers want and need, which helps her create messages that really connect. She's worked with big brands like Samsung, Visa, L'Oreal, and HBO. Annie, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So Annie, talk to us. What do we need to do to improve our conversion rate in just 4 weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. But also, that intro was amazing. I feel like I'm gonna need to steal that copy from you. So we'll have to
You certainly
that.
can.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, when I'm working with my clients, I follow the same process that I also teach in this course this 4-week course I put together for students. That version is a little bit more pared back and simpler, but the process, like kind of the main steps are the same, regardless of if you're working with me or working as a student, kind of doing the process on your own. But the first step always starts with what I call like internal clarity / internal research.
Okay.
And this is part of copywriting, but also I think part of a lot of kind of processes, whether you're working as like a strategist or as like a screenwriter, like it kind of just starts with asking questions. I think that when you can get clarity around what it is that you're doing, that is always the first step. So it sounds really basic, but the thing I do with my clients is I send them a discovery questionnaire. And in the course, I have you fill out that same questionnaire. And it's just asking questions like simple stuff. What is your goal for this website, right? What's your goal for your business? What are your visitors' goals? What are you selling? Let's break that thing down. Okay, so it's a product, but what are the components of that product? And how do those individual components help your customers or benefit them? And what are your customers' pain points, their challenges? What goals are important to them? Why did they buy your product? Why do they care? It's like just basically forcing yourself to go through that internal clarity step to make sure that you're not missing anything. First of all, I think that's a big one, right? It's like when you're in the weeds, you're not thinking about all those details that could potentially be important parts of selling your business.
Right.
So I feel like that's always the first step is like, okay, fill out the 30 questions.
Yeah.
And from there, that's like, can be just an amazing step in and of itself, right? It's like, wow, I didn't even think of this, or, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that. We should be talking about that more, or I never looked at my product in this way. So I think it can be like a really kind of cathartic process for people. So once you do the step one, and then I move from what I call
real quick, before we go to the second step, I'm curious. So I want to dig into goals a little bit because I'm sure you get such a wide array of goal ideas, right? Somebody's like, hey, I want to build $100 million business. This next person's like, I want to serve 1 million customers. What do you feel like are good goals that you've heard from clients and you're like, okay, that actually helps me, create a better message?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I always want to know from the clients, like those big aspirational goals. I think it's important for me to just understand, like, what are their expectations, right? So that's always important. But I feel like focusing on more just like general goals, like lead gen, like I want visitors to fill out my form, or I want them to, connect with me on this channel or whatever it is, like whatever action that is. So I think just like simplifying it a little bit is always really helpful, because then when we go to like create an experience, we have tangible sort of levers that we can pull that go back to that, even if it's not like, $200,000 by the end of the year, like a specific goal like that. It's like, let's go back a few steps and just focus on like, what is the action we want visitors to take that's related to the goal that you're trying to accomplish?
Sure. That totally makes sense. And then what are some other areas that you find are really critical? If there was like 1 or 2 other questions that you ask in that 30-page or 30-question report there, where you're like, okay, this is critical. This is going to be a huge differentiator for them, because as a business owner, and I've received, these types of questionnaires before, I'm busy. Most of the time I'm like, how quickly can I get through this? And I have to remind myself, like, the more time I spend on this and the more accurate, data that I can provide, the better results I'm going to get from whomever I'm working with. So, but I'm curious, like, what are the top maybe one or two questions that you ask in that survey where you're like, I really need you to spend time thinking about this?
Yeah, that's first of all, I think that's so. I always try to communicate that to my clients. I'm like, don't rush through it. Like, don't copy and paste stuff. Like, really spend the time because this, like, think of it as like the clay, right?
Yeah.
That I'm going to use to then create what's the end product. So, if you put in more time and effort, it's always amazing. So, I always recommend that to my students as well. So, the kind of biggest questions where I'm like, gosh, if they like skip everything and just focus on these,
Yeah.
I would say the first one is getting clarity on goals, right? So,
Okay.
like, what are your goals as it pertains to the website and what is the priority of those goals? So, we're not just like listing out 50 goals, like, let's focus on, maybe the top 3 to 5, and then let's rank them. So, we know when we're creating the structure of the site, what is the most important. So, that's the first one I would say. I think the next one is just like, the questions around product. So, what is the thing I'm selling? What are the individual components? How do they benefit the customer? And how are they different? I think
Mhm.
those are some really important questions because I think a lot of clients don't fully understand the differentiators question.
Yep.
They kind of, it's like, what do you do differently from your competitors? Or what do you do really well in comparison to them? Even if you're doing the
Yep.
same things, like what's difficult for them to replicate, right? So I
Yep.
think those are things that I like to focus on.
Okay.
And then finally, the questions around the customer. So, who are you serving? What is that person? What are their goals, right?
Yeah.
So I want to know their goals. And I think their goals and challenges, those are important. And then, okay, I know I'm asking a lot, but
Yeah.
two more that I love to ask and
Please. Yeah.
really
Go
love.
ahead.
Yeah, is around motivators and barriers. So I
Okay.
want to know what is going to stop someone from moving forward. And that could be anything. It could be price. It could be, they're not ready. It could be something about the product, like anything. And then I want to know on the opposite, what is going to motivate them? Really, from anything from seeing really great reviews and case studies all the way to getting a discount,
Yeah.
anything in between that could move the needle. So all those things I like to focus on.
Okay. So I want to hone in on the differentiation piece because I feel like it's so important. And I think a lot of business owners struggle with it. I know I've struggled with it. Read books on copywriting and differentiation, and I'm still like, okay, I really, I really need to focus on this. What do you feel like is a key to differentiation when you have people that are in a commodity type market? I mentioned before, we started recording this podcast. I had an SEO agency. Obviously, nowadays, there's millions of SEOs. What would you share to an SEO that's trying to differentiate themselves? Even if, I mentioned I serve the legal space. These days, there's hundreds of SEOs that serve the legal space. So what would you say to somebody you're like, okay, you really need to figure out this part to determine how to differentiate yourself?
Okay, I think that it comes down to what the customer is saying is the most important thing to them.
Okay.
Because that's really going to move the needle. Like at the end of the day, there might be things about your business that you feel strongly are important, right? But if
Yeah.
the customer doesn't care about that stuff, it's just almost pointless to focus on it or at least prioritize it at that same level. So I think the more you can really understand what moves the needle for your customers, why they purchased or what they love about you, those like, let's say 6 things, like 3, 6. Yeah, I'd say like anywhere from 3 to 6 is like generally a nice like little
Yeah.
package I would be focused on.
Okay. Amazing. All right, let's move on to step two. What comes next after we kind of outline those differences?
So this is a good segue because the second step is external research. So if the first step is internal research, getting clarity, the second step is validating your assumptions and gathering additional insights and data points to help you see the bigger picture from your customer's point of view. So when I work with clients, I'm using all different kinds of research methodologies to do that, right? It's like we'll look through their reviews or their existing research that they've already done. We will conduct interviews with their customers. We'll run surveys. There's all different kinds of things you can do. In the course, I focus on just one methodology because I feel like when you are a little bit more of a beginner, it can be overwhelming. Like,
Sure.
which one do I choose? Yeah, like, how do I know? So I think in the course, I focus on just surveys because I think it's, something we're all generally familiar with. It doesn't require like direct contact with a customer, and like that can be really scary for people. So I feel like just, hey, you put together a survey, these are the tools to use, these are the questions to ask, here's how you send, it's like you walk them through the process. So yeah, that's really what that step is all about, is just asking your customers all about, who they are, again, goals, challenges, pain points, why they chose the product, their process that they went through in finding and selecting the product, how that product compared to competitors they've either used in the past or have compared, during the sales process to you. Questions they might have had that they needed answers to. It's like you're really just trying to understand their entire perspective as it relates to your product. And that way, when you're finished with step 1 and step 2, you're like, wow, I have all this information that I can then use to make choices when it comes to the website.
Okay. And then talk to me about how many of these responses do you need to do your job effectively? Or if I'm doing this for myself, do I need to do this really well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's going to vary depending on like the size of your business, the maturity of your business. Some people will send out a survey and they're like, only 2 people responded. I'm like, yeah, that happens, right? So I feel like sometimes you have to get a little bit scrappy. Like if you're not getting a lot of responses, like doing some research in forums or sometimes you can use AI tools, or, maybe you're kind of doing like more general market research, like posting a poll in like a social media channel or something like that, or using a paid survey tool. There's all the different ways you can do that. But assuming you have people you can access, it depends on the methodology. Like if you're doing, for reviews, if I'm just like mining through reviews, I can use AI to sift through thousands of reviews and really find those recurring themes quickly, which is great. But for me, from a copywriting standpoint, I really need to understand the language and really get in there more. So I like to go through a minimum of 100 reviews. Like if we're doing the review mining one, sure. If we're doing something like customer interviews, I would say you can get away with 3, but usually 6 to 7 is kind of more of the 5 to 7 is more of the sweet spot. But again, it totally depends on the kind of customers you have, your access. Like I have a client right now and they serve 3 different audiences. So we're doing 2 interviews with each audience type, right? So it's like you kind of can break it up like that. If you're doing surveys, I would say you're aiming for somewhere in the like 50 to 100 response range. But again, you got to go with what you can get.
Right.
Volume is good, right? But it just, again, depends a little bit on the methodology, if that makes sense.
Okay. One of the things that we did a couple of years back with an e-commerce company that I own is we did a survey. We incentivized our customers. I think we offered them a coupon code or a free product or something to that effect. I think we actually got about 100 responses from that. Are there any creative incentive options that you've seen customers use to be able to generate higher than average surveys?
Yeah, absolutely. And usually the incentive is tied to the ask. So if you're going to be sending people, say, a survey that's got 20 questions in it, you need a higher level incentive. So something like, a $300 gift card instead of a $50 gift card, right? Like that sort of thing. So you need to think about that. Like how much time and effort am I asking of this person? And then make sure that the incentive fits that. So for me, I generally recommend using an Amazon gift card because most people use it. They're familiar with it. It's really easy to give it. You can just put in the person's email, a quick message, and send it off. Typically, I recommend $100 as a starting point, but you could do 50, you could do 25. Again, it kind of just depends on the ask. Like if it's a 1-question survey, I feel like that's another thing too, though, is I don't typically do like everybody gets a gift card. If say you're running a survey, usually it's more like a complete the survey for a chance to win a $200 Amazon gift card. Like that's, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. I like it. Okay. Very good. Awesome. And what comes next?
Okay. So after you've done your internal and external research, I like to put it all into like a really nice, clean, organized document. I call this different things. Like it's an insights report or a website brief. Like it doesn't really matter what you call it, but basically it's like this wonderful resource that you can return to throughout the website creation process. If you're stuck or you need guidance, it's just all the information is there in categories in like a really clear, easy to scan way. So, okay, I'm building a page about, why us, I need to focus on our differentiators. Boom, they're right there. It. They're all like listed out for you in the voice of customer. It's all the information from the first steps, right? So that I like to do that as like an in-between step. And I do include a little template in my course that you can fill out. With my clients, I present a more like polished version of that. It's quite long typically. But again, it's such an important resource, not just for the website process, but you can use it later for, making decisions around marketing or your SEO strategy or your product roadmap. It can be a really useful document for like onboarding contractors or employees. So I love that doc. But once that's done, you can move right into your information architecture. So for someone who doesn't know what that is, it's essentially a blueprint of your website from a content perspective. So if you've ever seen like a blueprint of a house, it's kind of the same idea. You're looking at like a skeleton version of what this thing is going to look and feel like before you do any copy or design. So you can kind of think of it as an outline too. So the IA or information architecture, you're going back to those first two steps to start mapping it out. Like, okay, based on what I know about my business from my own perspective, my own goals, and what I've learned about my customers, how many pages do I need? What are those pages? What are the title? How do I organize them in the navigation to make sure that it ladders back up to my goals and their goals? What's the kind of content on these pages? What's the order of that content? What kind of calls to action am I using? So it really just gives you that opportunity to see it all before you kind of get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And what are some like really important kind of keys to success in that phase?
I mean, having that document that I mentioned, the one that has like all of the information in one place, I feel like that's key because you're saving time. You're not having to go back and be like, oh, what did that person say? Or like, I don't remember, so it's like all there. So that saves time. It also like gives you a boost of confidence because you're not just like pulling things out of thin air. You have something you can refer to that's going to help you make these decisions. So I think people get overwhelmed when they're, of course, like building a website. It feels like a big step. You're doing a lot of different things. And I think people can get really stuck if you don't have that pre-work done to refer back to.
And is it helpful to use a ChatGPT or something like that to upload all of the reviews or surveys or anything of that nature and kind of interact with the AI tool based on the data from your customers?
I personally haven't done that only because this is my favorite part of the process. So I would never give it away to a robot, but I'm sure that you could absolutely do that. Like you could take this document, put it into Claude or like whatever you're using, upload it and say, based on this document, like what would you recommend in terms of, these? Yeah, exactly. You could certainly use it in that way for sure.
Okay, awesome. What comes next?
All right. So the final step of the process, at least from my perspective, is writing the copy. So the great part is you already have the structure, so you're not guessing, right? Because I think there's this misconception that copywriters are like, oh, like let me dream up this phrase. Like it just doesn't work like that. You're working off of this thing that's like this is the message you're focused on this page in this section, right? So you have a blueprint that you can just go right in. You've got all that stuff from the first two steps where you've got voice of customer data, meaning the responses to the survey, the reviews, the interview transcripts, the words you as the business owner wrote down in response to those questions. So if you have a section that okay, my customers care about customer support, I need to focus on that in this section, that's half the battle right there. You already know what it's about. It's just about phrasing it in a way that you feel will resonate with your customers. And that's where you return back to that language from your customers to sort of guide that process.
Okay. And is there a structure that you like to follow? Let's just take the homepage as an example. I was going through your website before this call and I was like, this is a great structure. Is there a certain structure where you're like, okay, this is exactly how I want to walk a visitor through my process or through getting to know me so that they actually do want to work with me?
It's so tempting to say like, yes, there's a template and a formula. Like, I wish I could say that, but the truth is like, those things are there and can be helpful. But I think at the end of the day, every project is different. Every customer, every, business goals, whatever. So you really have to think about that and make choices based on that unique situation. So yeah, unfortunately, not necessarily like a template or formula or something like that. But I think when you have all that pre-work and that information at your fingertips, you don't feel like you need that crutch because you're like, I know the answer. It should be this, you know?
That's awesome. So, obviously the headline is the most important part of any page, I would imagine. You tell me if you disagree, but if I'm not reading the headline, if I'm not intrigued by the headline, I'm not going to continue reading. So what are some of your tips for writing exceptional headlines?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, clear is always good. I think people
Okay.
can sometimes be like, "Ooh, let me be cute and clever and fun," but
Yeah.
then people are like, "What is this person talking about?" So I think clear and concise is going to be, the way to go, especially if you're not a copywriter. It's like just kind of focus on the basics first.
Yeah.
I think specificity is also a really important one. I think a lot of people get into this place where they write headlines that like kind of feel nice, but they don't actually say anything. They're
Okay.
very general. Like you could literally take the headline and just slap it on any website and
Yeah.
no one would know like it belonged to your industry or your business or your customers. So I'm always looking for ways to weave in as much specific language as possible. So that way I'm using words that I know the customer also uses. The customer
Mhm.
also cares about that specific thing. So I think that's really important is like clear, specific, yeah, and just kind of returning to your customers and using them as your inspiration. I think that's a big one.
Okay. And then what about guarantees? Are you a fan of, crafting some unique special guarantee depending on the business?
I mean, I love a guarantee, right? Like, I think the more proof you can provide, and
Yeah.
I believe guarantees fall under the proof category,
Yeah.
that could be testimonials, star ratings, certifications, logos, case studies, it's a big category.
Yeah.
And guarantees is one of those things. So, yeah, I think it's definitely, if it's applicable and it works for your business, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I really liked about your website is not only did you have great testimonials, but you had the picture there. I mean, it was like these are totally real people. Like I actually believe that they worked with you. And you
Good.
see these people sometimes and you're like, that's totally a stock image. Like, I know that's not a customer. So taking that extra time to be like, hey, would you mind, either I've asked for clients just to pull out their phone, like just shoot a quick picture there or a quick video testimonial. Like it really doesn't have to be anything too fancy in my experience. Has that been yours as well?
Absolutely. And I also feel like today with social media, people are used to like the authentic content,
Yeah.
something in a story on Instagram or a TikTok video or whatever. Like that's what people now associate with authenticity. So I feel like almost the more produced, sometimes it can even feel inauthentic. I mean, I don't think that applies to every type of business, but I do think it's like you don't have to wait until you have like a photo shoot with your clients to
Right.
use, great testimonials or images of them. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, perfect. So, one of the questions I like to ask every single guest is what do you feel like the top 1% of your clients in this case, or just people that have gone through your course, your customers, have in common where you're like, they did this, they did it really, really well, they took the time and they had a great outcome, and you could kind of trace it back to, maybe a couple attributes.
Okay, so I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it really does. It's like it always starts with the research. I think that's the thing that, like, my process, the top people in my industry, their process have in common, and what all my clients have in common, because obviously they use my process, and that's the
Yeah.
same process I teach in the course with my students. Because I just feel like you can't do this job effectively without that nice foundation, whether it's getting clarity, internal clarity, for your own self and your own business, and then the customer input as well. Like I think if I didn't have that, I couldn't do my job. So I
Right.
feel like that's really the thing that it always comes back to for me. It's like I always find that whenever I work with clients, and this is not so much recent, but in the past where I've tried to like skip that step or like, kind of gloss over it, that I always get into trouble later. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I should have done it the right
Yeah.
way. Why did I do that?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
it's very, very important.
Okay, awesome. Well, this has been very, very helpful. I know a lot of people are going to get out a lot out of this. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So they can get in touch with me on my website, and that's anniemaguire.com. And that's Maguire, because Maguire is spelled in a lot of different ways. You can join my newsletter from there on my website, and that goes out every week, or you can find me on LinkedIn, I post every day. And yeah, those are my two ways to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again for joining today.
Thank you so much too. I'm happy to be here.